The Warren Buffett Way. Preface. Almost exactly 20 years ago, while training to become an investment broker with Legg Mason, I received a Berkshire Hathaway annual report as part of the training materials. It was my very first exposure to Warren Buffett. Like most people who read Berkshire's annual reports, I was instantly impressed with the clarity of Buffett's writing. As a young professional during the 1980s, I found that my head was perpetually spinning as I tried to keep up with the stock market, the economy, and the constant buying and selling of securities. Yet, each time I read a story about Warren Buffett or an article written by him, his rational voice seemed to rise above the market's chaos. It was his calming influence that inspired me to write this book. The principal challenge I faced writing The Warren Buffett Way was to prove or disprove Buffett's claim that what I do is not beyond anybody else's competence. Some critics argue that, despite his success, Warren Buffett's idiosyncrasies mean his investment approach cannot be widely adopted. I disagree. Warren Buffett is idiosyncratic, it is a source of his success, but his methodology, once understood, is applicable to individuals and institutions alike. My goal in this book is to help investors employ the strategies that make Warren Buffett successful. The Warren Buffett Way describes what is, at its core, a simple approach. There are no computer programs to learn, no 2-inch thick investment manuals to decipher. Whether you are financially able to purchase 10% of a company or merely 100 shares, this book can help you achieve profitable investment returns. But do not judge yourself against Warren Buffett. His 5 decades of simultaneously owning and investing in businesses make it improbable that you can imitate his historical investment returns. Instead, compare your ongoing results against your peer group, whether that group includes actively managed mutual funds, an index fund, or the broader market in general. The original edition of this book enjoyed remarkable success, and I am deeply gratified that so many people found it useful. The success of The Warren Buffett Way, however, is first and foremost a testament to Warren Buffett. His wit and integrity have charmed millions of people worldwide, and his intellect and investment record have, for years, mesmerized the professional investment community, me included. This unparalleled combination makes Warren Buffett the single most popular role model in investing today. I had never met Warren Buffett before writing this book, and I did not consult with him while developing it. Although consultation surely would have been a bonus, I was fortunate to be able to draw from his extensive writings on investing that date back more than 4 decades. Throughout the book, I have employed extensive quotes from Berkshire Hathaway's annual reports, especially the famous chairman's letters. Mr. Buffett granted permission to use this copyrighted material, but only after he had reviewed the book. This permission in no way implies that he cooperated on the book or that he made available to me secret documents or strategies that are not already available from his public writings. Almost everything Buffett does is public, but it is loosely noted. What was needed, in my opinion, and what would be valuable to investors, was a thorough examination of his thoughts and strategies aligned with the purchases that Berkshire made over the years, all compiled in one source. And that was the starting point for the original edition of The Warren Buffett Way. This revised edition, 10 years later, retains that basic goal, to examine Buffett's more recent actions for the investment lessons they hold and to consider whether changes in the financial climate have triggered changes in his strategies. Some things became clear quickly. Buffett's level of activity in the stock market has dropped off significantly in recent years. He has bought entire companies more often than he has bought shares. He has on occasion moved more strongly into bonds, investment-grade corporate, government, even high yield, and then, when they became less attractive, moved out again. Some of these newly acquired companies are profiled in the chapters that follow, along with a discussion of how the characteristics of those companies reflect the tenets of the Warren Buffett Way. However, since many of these companies were privately held before Buffett bought them, the specifics of their financial data were not publicly available. I cannot, therefore, discern with any confidence what Buffett might have thought of those companies' economic conditions, other than to say that he clearly liked what he saw. For this updated edition, I also took the opportunity to incorporate some material that was not presented in the original book. I added a chapter on Buffett's style of portfolio management, a style he has labeled focus investing. It is a cornerstone of his success, and I highly recommend it. I also included a chapter on the psychology of money, the many ways that emotion plays havoc with good decisions. To invest wisely, it is necessary to become aware of all the temptations to behave foolishly. It is necessary for two reasons. If you know how to recognize the emotional potholes, you can avoid tripping into them. And you will be able to recognize the missteps of others in time to profit from their mistakes. 10 years is either a very long time, or not long at all, depending on your circumstances and your personal view of the world. For investors, what we can say is that during these 10 years, context has changed but the basics have not. That's good, because in another 10 years the context can change back again, or change in an entirely different direction. Those who remain grounded in basic principles can survive those upheavals far better than those who do not. In the 10 years since I wrote The Warren Buffett Way, the noise level in the stock market has continued to rise, sometimes to a deafening screech. Television commentators, financial writers, analysts, and market strategists are all over-talking each other to get investors' attention. At the same time, many investors are immersed in internet chat rooms and message boards exchanging questionable information and misleading tips. Yet, despite all this available information, investors find it increasingly difficult to earn a profit. Some are hard-pressed even to continue. Stock prices skyrocket with little reason, then plummet just as quickly. People who have turned to investing for their children's education and their own retirement are constantly frightened. There appears to be neither rhyme nor reason to the market, only folly. Far above the market madness stand the wisdom and counsel of Warren Buffett. In an environment that seems to favor the speculator over the investor, Buffett's investment advice has proven, time and again, to be a safe harbor for millions of lost investors. Occasionally, misaligned investors will yell out, "But it's different this time," and occasionally they will be right. Politics spring surprises, markets react, then economics reverberate in a slightly different tone. New companies are constantly born while others mature. Industries evolve and adapt. Change is constant, but the investment principles outlined in this book have remained the same. Here is a succinct and powerful lesson from the 1996 annual report. Your goal as an investor should be simply to purchase, at a rational price, a part interest in an easily understood business whose earnings are virtually certain to be materially higher, 5, 10, and 20 years from now. Over time, you will find only a few companies that meet those standards, so when you see one that qualifies, you should buy a meaningful amount of stock. Whatever level of funds you have available for investing, whatever industry or company you are interested in, you cannot find a better touchstone than that. Robert G. Hagstrom, Villanova, Pennsylvania, September 2004. Introduction. The Wholehearted Living. Wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging. The journey. Wholehearted living is not a one-time choice. It is a process. In fact, I believe it's the journey of a lifetime. My goal is to bring awareness and clarity to the constellation of choices that lead to wholeheartedness and to share what I've learned from many people who have dedicated themselves to living and loving with their whole hearts. Before embarking on any journey, including this one, it's important to talk about what we need to bring along. What does it take to live and love from a place of worthiness? How do we embrace imperfection? How do we cultivate what we need and let go of the things that are holding us back? The answers to all of these questions are courage, compassion, and connection, the tools we need to work our way through our journey. If you're thinking, great, I just need to be a superhero to fight perfectionism, I understand. Courage, compassion, and connection seem like big, lofty ideals. But in reality, they are daily practices that, when exercised enough, become these incredible gifts in our lives. And the good news is that our vulnerabilities are what force us to call upon these amazing tools. Because we're human and so beautifully imperfect, we get to practice using our tools on a daily basis. In this way, courage, compassion, and connection become gifts, the gifts of imperfection. Here's what you'll find in the pages that follow. In the first chapter, I explain what I've learned about courage, compassion, and connection and how they are truly the tools for developing worthiness. Once we get some clarity about the tools that we are going to use on this journey, in the next chapter we move to the heart of the matter, love, belonging, and worthiness. I answer some of the most difficult questions of my career. What is love? Can we love someone and betray them? Why does our constant need to fit in sabotage real belonging? Can we love the people in our lives, like our partners and children, more than we love ourselves? How do we define worthiness, and why do we so often end up hustling for it rather than believing in it? We encounter obstacles on every journey we make, the wholehearted journey is no exception. In the next chapter, we'll explore what I've found to be the greatest barriers to living and loving with our whole hearts and how we can develop effective strategies to move through the barriers and to cultivate resilience. From there, we'll explore the 10 guideposts for the wholehearted journey, daily practices that provide direction for our journey. There's one chapter for each guidepost, and each chapter is illustrated with stories, definitions, quotes, and ideas for making deliberate and inspired choices about the way we live and love. Defining moments. This book is full of big concept words such as love, belonging, and authenticity. I think it's critically important to define the gauzy words that are tossed around every day but rarely explained. And I think good definitions should be accessible and actionable. I've tried to define these words in a way that will help us unpack the term and explore the pieces. When we dig down past the feel-good words and excavate the daily activities and experiences that put the heart in wholehearted living, we can see how people define the concepts that drive their actions, beliefs, and emotions. For example, when the research participants talked about a concept such as love, I was careful to define it as they experienced it. Sometimes that required developing new definitions, like I actually did with love and many other words. Other times, when I started looking around in the existing literature, I found definitions that captured the spirit of the participants' experiences. A good example of this is play. Play is an essential component to wholehearted living, and when I researched the topic, I discovered the amazing work of Dr. Stuart Brown. So, rather than creating a new definition, I reference his work because it accurately reflects what I learned in the research. I realize that definitions spark controversy and disagreement, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather we debate the meaning of words that are important to us than not discuss them at all. We need common language to help us create awareness and understanding, which is essential to wholehearted living. Digging deep. In early 2008, when my blog was still pretty new, I wrote a post about breaking my dig deep button. You know the dig deep button, right? It's the button that you rely on when you're too bone tired to get up one more time in the middle of the night or to do one more load of throw up diarrhea laundry or to catch one more plane or to return one more call or to please/perform/perfect the way you normally do even when you just want to flip someone off and hide under the covers. The dig deep button is a secret level of pushing through when we're exhausted and overwhelmed, and when there's too much to do and too little time for self-care. In my blog post, I explained how I had decided not to fix my dig deep button. I made a promise to myself that when I felt emotionally, physically, and spiritually done, I'd try slowing down rather than relying on my old standbys, pushing through, soldiering on, and sucking it up. It worked for a while, but I missed my button. I missed having something to turn to when I was depleted and down. I needed a tool to help me dig my way out. So, I turned back to my research to see if I could find a way to dig that was more consistent with wholehearted living. Maybe there was something better than just sucking it up. Here's what I found: men and women who live wholeheartedly do indeed dig deep. They just do it in a different way. When they're exhausted and overwhelmed, they get deliberate in their thoughts and behaviors through prayer, meditation, or simply setting their intentions, inspired to make new and different choices, going. They take action. Since I made that discovery, I've been digging deep the new way, and it's been pretty amazing. One example happened just recently when I was lost in an internet fog. Rather than working, I was just lulling myself into a haze by mindlessly playing on Facebook and piddling on the computer. It was neither relaxing nor productive, it was just a giant time and energy suck. I tried the new dig deep, get deliberate, inspired, and going. I told myself, if you need to refuel and losing yourself online is fun and relaxing, then do it. If not, do something deliberately relaxing. Find something inspiring to do rather than something soul-sucking. Then, last but not least, get up and do it. I closed my laptop, said a little prayer to remind myself to be self-compassionate, and watched a movie that had been sitting in a Netflix envelope on my desk for over a month. It was exactly what I needed. It wasn't the old dig deep, the pushing through. I didn't force myself to start working or to do something productive. Rather, I prayerfully, intentionally, and thoughtfully did something restorative. Each guidepost has a dig deep section to help us start thinking about how we get deliberate and inspired about our choices, and how we take action. I share my personal dig deep strategies with you, and I encourage you to come up with your own. These new strategies have been so much more effective than the old pushing through. What I hope to contribute. This book is full of powerful topics such as self-compassion, acceptance, and gratitude. I'm not the first to talk about these subjects, and I'm certainly not the smartest researcher or the most talented writer. I am, however, the first to explain how these topics work individually and together to cultivate wholehearted living. And, maybe more important, I'm certainly the first person to come at these topics from the perspective of someone who has spent years studying shame and fear. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to give up my research on shame. It's extremely difficult to dedicate your career to studying topics that make people squeamish. On several occasions I've literally thrown my hands up and said, I quit. It's too hard. There are so many cool things to study. I want out of this. I didn't choose to study shame and fear, the research chose me. Now I know why. It was what I needed, professionally and personally, to prepare for this work on wholeheartedness. We can talk about courage and love and compassion until we sound like a greeting card store, but unless we're willing to have an honest conversation about what gets in the way of putting these into practice in our daily lives, we will never change. Never, ever. Courage sounds great, but we need to talk about how it requires us to let go of what other people think, and for most of us, that's scary. Compassion is something we all want, but are we willing to look at why boundary setting and saying no is a critical component of compassion? Are we willing to say no, even if we're disappointing someone? Belonging is an essential component of wholehearted living, but first we have to cultivate self-acceptance. Why is this such a struggle? Before I start writing, I always ask myself, why is this book worth writing? What's the contribution that I'm hoping to make? Ironically, I think the most valuable contribution that I can make to the ongoing discussions about love, belonging, and worthiness stems from my experiences as a shame researcher. Coming at this work with a full understanding of how the shame tapes and gremlins keep us feeling afraid and small, allows me to do more than present great ideas. This perspective helps me share real strategies for changing our lives. If we want to know why we're all so afraid to let our true selves be seen and known, we have to understand the power of shame and fear. If we can't stand up to the never good enough and who do you think you are? We can't move forward. I only wish that during those desperate and defeated moments of my past, when I was knee-deep in shame research, I could have known what I know now. If I could go back and whisper in my ear, I'd tell myself the same thing that I'll tell you as we begin this journey. Owning our story can be hard but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. 1. The world's greatest investor. Every year, Forbes magazine publishes a list of the 400 richest Americans, the elite Forbes 400. Individuals on the list come and go from year to year, as their personal circumstances change and their industries rise and fall, but some names are constant. Among those leading the list year in and year out are certain mega-billionaires who trace their wealth to a product, computer software or hardware, a service, retailing, or lucky parentage, inheritance. Of those perennially in the top 5, only one made his fortune through investment savvy. That one person is Warren Buffett. In the early 1990s, he was number 1. Then for a few years, he seesawed between number 1 and number 2 with a youngster named Bill Gates. Even for the dot-com crazed year 2000, when so much of the wealth represented by the Forbes 400 came from the phenomenal growth in technology, Buffett, who smilingly eschews high-tech anything, was firmly in 4th position. He was still the only person in the top 5 for whom the source of wealth column reads stock market. In 2004, he was solidly back in the number 2 position. In 1956, Buffett started his investment partnership with $100. After 13 years, he cashed out with $25 million. At the time of this reading, mid-2004, his personal net worth has increased to $42.9 billion. The stock in his company is selling at $92,900 a share, and millions of investors around the world hang on his every word. To fully appreciate Warren Buffett, however, we have to go beyond the dollars, the performance accolades, and the reputation. Investment beginnings. Warren Edward Buffett was born August 30, 1930, in Omaha, Nebraska. His grandfather owned a grocery store, and once employed a young Charlie Munger. His father was a local stockbroker. As a boy, Warren Buffett was always fascinated with numbers and could easily do complex mathematical calculations in his head. At age 8, he began reading his father's books on the stock market. At age 11, he marked the board at the brokerage house where his father worked. His early years were enlivened with entrepreneurial ventures, and he was so successful that he told his father he wanted to skip college and go directly into business. He was overruled. Buffett attended the business school at the University of Nebraska, and while there, he read a new book on investing by a Columbia professor named Benjamin Graham. It was, of course, The Intelligent Investor. Buffett was so taken with Graham's ideas that he applied to Columbia Business School so that he could study directly with Graham. Bill Ruane, now chairman of the Sequoia Fund, was in the same class. He recalls that there was an instantaneous mental chemistry between Graham and Buffett, and that the rest of the class was primarily an audience. One not long after Buffett graduated from Columbia with a master's degree in economics, Graham invited his former student to join his company, the Graham-Newman Corporation. During his 2-year tenure there, Buffett became fully immersed in his mentor's investment approach. See Chapter 2 for a full discussion of Graham's philosophy. In 1956, Graham-Newman disbanded. Graham, then 61, decided to retire, and Buffett returned to Omaha. Armed with the knowledge he had acquired from Graham, the financial backing of family and friends, and $100 of his own money, Buffett began a limited investment partnership. He was 25 years old. THEBUFFETTPARTNERSHIP, Ltd. The partnership began with 7 limited partners who together contributed $105,000. The limited partners received 6% annually on their investment and 75% of the profits above this bogey. The remaining 25% went to Buffett, who as general partner had decently free rein to invest the partnership's funds. Over the next 13 years, Buffett compounded money at an annual rate of 29.5%. It was no easy task. Although the Dow Jones Industrial Average declined in price 5 different years during the 13-year period, Buffett's partnership never had a down year. Buffett, in fact, had begun the partnership with the ambitious goal of outperforming the Dow by 10 points every year. And he did it, not by 10, but by 22 points. As Buffett's reputation grew, more people asked him to manage their money. For the partnership, Buffett bought controlling interests in several public and private companies, and in 1962 he began buying shares in a nailing textile company called Berkshire Hathaway. That same year, 1962, Buffett moved the partnership office from his home to Kiewit Plaza in Omaha, where his office remains today. The next year, he made a stunning purchase. Tainted by a scandal involving one of its clients, American Express saw its shares drop from $65 to $35 almost overnight. Buffett had learned Ben Graham's lesson well: when stocks of a strong company are selling below their intrinsic value, act decisively. Buffett made the bold decision to put 40% of the partnership's total assets, $13 million, into American Express stock. Over the next 2 years, the shares tripled in price, and the partners netted a cool $20 million in profit. It was pure Graham, and pure Buffett. By 1965, the partnership's assets had grown to $26 million. 4 years later, explaining that he found the market highly speculative and worthwhile values increasingly scarce, Buffett decided to end the investment partnership. When the partnership disbanded, investors received their proportional interests. Some of them, at Buffett's recommendation, sought out money manager Bill Ruane, his old classmate at Columbia. Ruane agreed to manage their money, and thus was born the Sequoia Fund. Others, including Buffett, invested their partnership revenues in Berkshire Hathaway. By that point, Buffett's share of the partnership had grown to $25 million, which was enough to give him control of Berkshire Hathaway. What he did with it is well known in the investment world. Even those with only a passing interest in the stock market recognize Buffett's name and know something of his stunning success. In the following chapters, we trace the upward trajectory of Berkshire Hathaway in the 40 years that Buffett has been in control. Perhaps more important, we also look beneath the surface to uncover the common-sense philosophy on which he founded his success. The man and his company Warren Buffett is not easy to describe. Physically, he is unremarkable, with looks often described as grandfatherly. Intellectually, he is considered a genius, yet his down-to-earth relationship with people is truly uncomplicated. He is simple, straightforward, forthright, and honest. He displays an engaging combination of sophisticated dry wit and cornball humor. He has a profound reverence for all things logical and a foul distaste for imbecility. He embraces the simple and avoids the complicated. When reading Berkshire's annual reports, one is struck by how comfortable Buffett is quoting the Bible, John Maynard Keynes, or Mae West. The operable word here is reading. Each report is 60 to 70 pages of dense information, no pictures, no color graphics, no charts. Those who are disciplined enough to start on page 1 and continue uninterrupted are rewarded with a healthy dose of financial acumen, folksy humor, and unabashed honesty. Buffett is candid in his reporting. He emphasizes both the pluses and the minuses of Berkshire's businesses. He believes that people who own stock in Berkshire Hathaway are owners of the company, and he tells them as much as he would like to be told if he were in their shoes. When Buffett took control of Berkshire, the corporate net worth was $22 million. 40 years later, it has grown to $69 billion. It has long been Buffett's goal to increase the book value of Berkshire Hathaway at a 15% annual rate, well above the return achieved by the average American company. Since he took control of Berkshire in 1964, the gain has been much greater. Book value per share has grown from $19 to $50,498, a rate of 22.2% compounded annually. This relative performance is all the more impressive when you consider that Berkshire is penalized by both income and capital gains taxes, and the Standard & Poor's 500 returns are pre-tax. Starting in 1979, accounting rules required insurance companies to value the equity securities they hold at market rather than at the lower of cost or market, which was previously the requirement. In this table, Berkshire's results through 1978 have been restated to conform to the changed rules. In all other respects, the results are calculated using the numbers originally reported. The S&P 500 numbers are pre-tax, whereas the Berkshire numbers are after tax. If a corporation such as Berkshire were simply to have owned the S&P 500 and accrued the appropriate taxes, its results would have lagged the S&P 500 in years when that index showed a positive return, but would have exceeded the S&P in years when the index showed a negative return. Over the years, the tax costs would have caused the aggregate lag to be substantial. On a year-by-year basis, Berkshire's returns have at times been volatile. Changes in the stock market and thus the underlying stocks that Berkshire owns create wide swings in per share value. See Table 1.1. To appreciate the volatility, compare the results for 1998 with 1999. In 1998, Berkshire's value increased more than 48%. Then, in 1999, Berkshire's increase dropped to a paltry 0.5%, yet the S&P 500 increased 21%. Two factors were involved. Berkshire's results can be traced to poor return on consumer non-durables, Coca-Cola and Gillette, while the S&P increase was fueled by the outstanding performance of technology stocks, which Berkshire does not own. Speaking with the candor for which he is famous, Buffett admitted in the 1999 annual report that truly large superiorities over the S&P index are a thing of the past. He predicted, however, that over time Berkshire's performance would be modestly better than the S&P. And for the next 3 years, this turned out to be the case. Then in 2003, even though Berkshire had a terrific year, book value up 21%, the S&P did even better. Buffett today. Over the most recent years, starting in the late 1990s, Buffett has been less active in the stock market than he was in the 1980s and early 1990s. Many people have noticed this lack of activity and have wondered whether it signaled that the market had hit its top. Others have theorized that the lack of new major purchases of common stocks simply means that the type of stocks Buffett likes to purchase are no longer selling at attractive prices. We know it is Buffett's preference to buy certainties at a discount. Certainties are defined by the predictability of a company's economics. The more predictable a company's economics, the more certainty we might have about its valuation. When we look down the list of stocks that Buffett owns as well as the wholly owned companies inside Berkshire, we are struck by the high degree of predictability reflected there. The discount part of the statement obviously refers to the stock price. Knowing that Buffett likes to buy highly predictable economics at prices below the intrinsic value of the business, we can conclude that his buyer's strike reflects the lack of choices in this arena. I am pretty sure that if Coca-Cola, Gillette, or other similar businesses were today selling at 50 cents on the dollar, Buffett would add more shares to Berkshire's portfolio. We also know Buffett's discipline of operating only within his circle of competence. Think of this circle of competence as the cumulative history of your experience. If someone had successfully operated a certain business within a certain industry for a decade or more, we would say that person had achieved a high level of competence for the task at hand. However, if someone else had only a few years' experience operating a new business, we could reasonably question that person's level of competence. Perhaps in Buffett's rational mind, the sum total of his business experience in studying and operating the businesses in Berkshire's portfolio sets the bar of competence so high that it would be difficult to achieve a similar level of insight into a new industry. So perhaps Buffett faces a dilemma. Within his circle of competence, the types of stocks he likes to purchase are not currently selling at discounted prices. At the same time, outside his circle of competence, faster-growing businesses are being born in new industries that have yet to achieve the high level of economic certainty Buffett requires. If this analysis is correct, it explains why there have been no new large buys of common stocks in the past few years. We would be foolish indeed to assume that because the menu of stocks available for purchase has been reduced, Warren Buffett is left without investment options. Certainly he has been active in the fixed income market, including taking a significant position in high-yield bonds in 2002. He is alert for the periodic arbitrage opportunity as well, but considering the amount of capital Buffett needs to deploy to make meaningful returns, the arbitrage markets are perhaps not as fruitful as they once were. But Berkshire Hathaway shareholders should not feel they are being deprived of opportunities. Too often, shareholders forget one of the most important owner-related business principles Buffett outlines each year in the annual report. The fourth principle states, our preference would be able to reach our goal of maximizing Berkshire's average annual rate of gain in intrinsic value by directly owning a diversified group of businesses that generate cash and consistently earn above-average returns on capital. Our second choice is to own parts of similar businesses attained primarily through the purchases of marketable common stocks. In Berkshire's early years, owning common stocks made the most sense economically. Now, as common stock prices have risen dramatically and the purchasing power of Berkshire's retained earnings has mushroomed, the strategy of buying whole businesses, which is Buffett's stated preference, has come to the forefront. There is a personal factor as well. We know that Buffett greatly enjoys his relationships with his operating managers and takes a great deal of pride in Berkshire's collection of operating businesses. Conversely, the angst he has endured by being a shareholder of publicly traded companies, with the issues of executive compensation and questionable capital reinvestment strategies that accompany ownership, may make being a shareholder less appealing for Buffett today than it used to be. If the economics are not compelling, why would Buffett choose to enter the corporate governance fiascos associated with being a major shareholder? The only activity Buffett involves himself in with Berkshire's operating businesses is setting executive compensation and allocating the professorates. Inside Berkshire's world, these decisions are highly rational. Outside in the stock market, management decisions on executive compensation and capital reallocation do not always reflect rationality. What does this mean for individual investors? Because Buffett is not actively involved in the stock market, should they automatically pull back as well? Buffett's alternative strategy is to buy businesses outright, an option that is out of reach for most investors. So how should they proceed? There appear to be two obvious choices. One is to make an investment in Berkshire Hathaway and so participate in the economics of these outstanding businesses. The second choice is to take the Buffett approach to investing, expand your circle of competence by studying intently the business models of the companies participating in the new economy landscape, and march ahead. I believe that the fundamental principles that have so long guided Buffett's decisions are uncompromised, and they still carry opportunities for careful investors to outperform the S&P 500. The purpose of this book is to present those principles in a way that thoughtful investors can understand and use. 2. The education of Warren Buffett. Very few people can come close to Warren Buffett's investment record, and no one can top it. Through 4 decades of market ups and downs, he has continued on a steady course with unmatched success. What he does is not flashy, even at times very much out of favor, and yet over and over, he has prevailed over others whose exploits gave them temporary, flash-in-the-pan stardom. He watches, smiles, and continues on his way. How did Buffett come to his investment philosophy? Who influenced his thinking, and how has he integrated their teachings into a session? To put the question another way, how is it that this particular genius turned out so differently? Warren Buffett's approach to investing is uniquely his own, yet it rests on the bedrock of philosophies absorbed from four powerful figures: Benjamin Graham, Philip Fisher, John Burr Williams, and Charles Munger. Together, they are responsible for Buffett's financial education, both formal and informal. The first three are educators in the classic sense, and the last is Buffett's partner, alter ego, and pal. All have had a major influence on Buffett's thinking. They have much to offer modern-day investors as well. Benjamin Graham. Graham is considered the dean of financial analysis. He was awarded that distinction because before him there was no financial analysis profession, and after him they began to call it that. One Graham's two most celebrated works are Security Analysis, co-authored with David Dodd, and originally published in 1934, and The Intelligent Investor, originally published in 1949. Security Analysis appeared just a few years after the 1929 stock market crash and in the depths of the nation's worst depression. While other academicians sought to explain this economic phenomenon, Graham helped people regain their financial footing and proceed with a profitable course of action. Graham began his career on Wall Street as a messenger at the brokerage firm of Neuberger, Henderson and Loeb, posting bond and stock prices on a blackboard for $12 a week. From messenger, he rose to writing research reports and soon was awarded a partnership in the firm. By 1919, he was earning an annual salary of $600,000. He was 25 years old. In 1926, Graham formed an investment partnership with Jerome Newman. It was this partnership that hired Buffett some 30 years later. Graham Newman survived the 1929 crash, the Great Depression, World War II, and the Korean War before it dissolved in 1956. From 1928 through 1956, while at Graham Newman, Graham taught night courses in finance at Columbia. Few people know that Graham was financially ruined by the 1929 crash. For the second time in his life, the first being when his father died, leaving the family financially unprotected, Graham set about rebuilding his fortune. The haven of academia allowed him the opportunity for reflection and re-evaluation. With the counsel of David Dodd, also a professor at Columbia, Graham produced what became the classic treatise on conservative investing, Security Analysis. Between them, Graham and Dodd had over 15 years of investment experience. It took them 4 years to complete the book. The essence of security analysis is that a well-chosen diversified portfolio of common stocks, based on reasonable prices, can be a sound investment. Step by careful step, Graham helps the investors see the logic of his approach. The first problem that Graham had to contend with was the lack of a universal definition for investment that would distinguish it from speculation. Considering the complexities of the issue, Graham proposed his own definition. An investment operation is one which, upon thorough analysis, promises safety of principal and a satisfactory return. Operations not meeting these requirements are speculative. What did he mean by thorough analysis? Just this: the careful study of available facts with the attempt to draw conclusions therefrom based on established principles and sound logic. The next part of Graham's definition is critical. A true investment must have two qualities: some degree of safety of principal and a satisfactory rate of return. Safety, he cautions, is not absolute. Unusual or improbable occurrences can put even a safe bond into default. Rather, investors should look for something that would be considered safe from loss under reasonable conditions. Satisfactory return, the second necessity, includes not only income but also price appreciation. Graham notes that satisfactory is a subjective term. Return can be any amount, however low, as long as the investor acts with intelligence and adheres to the full definition of investment. Had it not been for the bond market's poor performance, Graham's definition of investing might have been overlooked. But when, between 1929 and 1932, the Dow Jones Bond Average declined from 97.70 to 65.78, bonds could no longer be mindlessly labeled pure investments. Like stocks, not only did bonds lose considerable value but many issuers went bankrupt. What was needed, therefore, was a process that could distinguish the investment characteristics of both stocks and bonds from their speculative counterparts. Graham reduced the concept of sound investing to a motto he called the margin of safety. With this motto, he sought to unite all securities, stocks, and bonds in a singular approach to investing. In essence, a margin of safety exists when securities are selling, for whatever reason, at less than their real value. The notion of buying undervalued securities regardless of market levels was a novel idea in the 1930s and 1940s. Graham's goal was to outline such a strategy. In Graham's view, establishing a margin of safety concept for bonds was not too difficult. It wasn't necessary, he said, to accurately determine the company's future income, but only to note the difference between earnings and fixed charges. If that margin was large enough, the investor would be protected from an unexpected decline in the company's income. If, for example, an analyst reviewed the operating history of a company and discovered that, on average, for the past 5 years the company was able to earn annually 5 times its fixed charges, then that company's bonds possessed a margin of safety. The real test was Graham's ability to adapt the concept for common stocks. He reasoned that if the spread between the price of a stock and the intrinsic value of a company was large enough, the margin of safety concept could be used to select stocks. For this strategy to work systematically, Graham admitted, investors needed a way to identify undervalued stocks. And that meant they needed a technique for determining a company's intrinsic value. Graham's definition of intrinsic value, as it appeared in security analysis, was that value which is determined by the facts. These facts included a company's assets, its earnings and dividends, and any future definite prospects. Graham acknowledged that the single most important factor in determining a company's value was its future earnings power, a calculation that is bound to be imprecise. Simply stated, a company's intrinsic value could be found by estimating the earnings of the company and multiplying the earnings by an appropriate capitalization factor. The company's stability of earnings, assets, dividend policy, and financial health influenced this capitalization factor, or multiplier. Graham asked us to accept that intrinsic value is an elusive concept. It is distinct from the market's quotation price. Originally, intrinsic value was thought to be the same as a company's book value, or the sum of its real assets minus obligations. This notion led to the early belief that intrinsic value was definite. However, analysts came to know that the value of a company was not only its net real assets but also the value of the earnings that these assets produced. Graham proposed that it was not essential to determine a company's exact intrinsic value. Instead, investors should accept an approximate measure or range of value. Even an approximate value, compared against the selling price, would be sufficient to gauge margin of safety. There are 2 rules of investing, said Graham. The first rule is don't lose. The second rule is don't forget rule number 1. This don't lose philosophy steered Graham toward 2 approaches for selecting common stocks that, when applied, adhered to the margin of safety. The first approach was buying a company for less than 2/3 of its net asset value, and the second was focusing on stocks with low price to earnings, P/E, ratios. Buying a stock for a price that is less than 2/3 of its net assets fit neatly into Graham's sense of the present and satisfied his desire for some mathematical expectation. Graham gave no weight to a company's plant, property, and equipment. Furthermore, he deducted all the company's short and long-term liabilities. What remained would be the net current assets. If the stock price was below this per share value, Graham reasoned that a margin of safety existed and a purchase was warranted. Graham considered this to be a foolproof method of investing, but he acknowledged that waiting for a market correction before making an investment might be unreasonable. He set out to design a second approach to buying stocks. He focused on stocks that were down in price and that sold at a low P/E ratio. Additionally, the company must have some net asset value. It must owe less than it's worth. Over the years, many other investors have searched for similar shortcuts for determining intrinsic value. Low P/E ratios, Graham's first technique, was a general favorite. We have learned, however, that making decisions on P/E ratios alone is not enough to ensure profitable returns. Today, most investors rely on John Burr Williams's classic definition of value, described later in this chapter. The value of any investment is the discounted present value of its future cash flow. The basic ideas of investing are to look at stocks as businesses, use market fluctuations to your advantage, and seek a margin of safety. That's what Ben Graham taught us. 100 years from now they will still be the cornerstones of investing. For Warren Buffett, 1994. Both of Graham's approaches, buying a stock for less than 2/3 of net asset value and buying stocks with low P/E multiples, had a common characteristic. The stocks that Graham selected based on these methods were deeply out of favor with the market. Some macro or micro event caused the market to price these stocks below their value. Graham felt strongly that these stocks, priced unjustifiably low, were attractive purchases. Graham's conviction rested on certain assumptions. First, he believed that the market frequently mispriced stocks, usually because of the human emotions of fear and greed. At the height of optimism, greed moved stocks beyond their intrinsic value, creating an overpriced market. At other times, fear moved prices below intrinsic value, creating an undervalued market. His second assumption was based on the statistical phenomenon known as reversion to the mean, although he did not use that term. More eloquently, he quoted the poet Horace, "Many shall be restored that now are fallen, and many shall fall that now are in honor." However stated, by statistician or poet, Graham believed that an investor could profit from the corrective forces of an inefficient market. Philip Fisher. While Graham was writing security analysis, Philip Fisher was beginning his career as an investment counselor. After graduating from Stanford's Graduate School of Business Administration, Fisher began work as an analyst at the Anglo-London and Paris National Bank in San Francisco. In less than 2 years, he was made head of the bank's statistical department. It was from this perch that he witnessed the 1929 stock market crash. After a brief and unproductive career with a local brokerage house, Fisher decided to start his own investment counseling firm. On March 1, 1931, Fisher and Company began soliciting clients. Starting an investment counseling firm in the early 1930s might have appeared foolhardy, but Fisher figured he had 2 advantages. First, any investors who had any money left after the crash were probably very unhappy with their existing broker. Second, in the midst of the Great Depression, business people had plenty of time to sit and talk with Fisher. At Stanford, one of Fisher's business classes had required him to accompany his professor on periodic visits to companies in the San Francisco area. The professor would get the business managers to talk about their operations, and often helped them solve an immediate problem. Driving back to Stanford, Fisher and his professor would recap what they observed about the companies and managers they visited. "That hour each week," Fisher said, "was the most useful training I ever received." 5 From these experiences, Fisher came to believe that people could make superior profits by 1. Investing in companies with above-average potential and 2. Aligning themselves with the most capable management. To isolate these exceptional companies, Fisher developed a point system that qualified a company by the characteristics of its business and its management. As to the first, companies with above-average potential, the characteristic that most impressed Fisher was a company's ability to grow sales over the years at rates greater than the industry average. 6 That growth, in turn, usually was a combination of two factors: a significant commitment to research and development, and an effective sales organization. A company could develop outstanding products and services, but unless they were expertly merchandised, the research and development effort would never translate into revenues. In Fisher's view, however, market potential alone is only half the story. The other half is consistent profits. All the sales growth in the world won't produce the right type of investment vehicle if, over the years, profits do not grow correspondingly, he said. 7 Accordingly, Fisher examined a company's profit margins, its dedication to maintaining and improving those margins, and, finally, its cost analysis and accounting controls. No company, said Fisher, will be able to sustain its profitability unless it is able to break down the costs of doing business while simultaneously understanding the cost of each step in the manufacturing process. To do so, he explained, a company must instill adequate accounting controls and cost analysis. This cost information, Fisher noted, enables a company to direct its resources to those products or services with the highest economic potential. Furthermore, accounting controls will help identify snags in a company's operations. These snags, or inefficiencies, act as an early warning device aimed at protecting the company's overall profitability. Fisher's sensitivity about a company's profitability was linked with another concern: a company's ability to grow in the future without requiring equity financing. If a company is able to grow only by selling stocks, he said, the larger number of shares outstanding will cancel out any benefit that stockholders might realize from the company's growth. He explained, is to uncover as much about a company as possible from those individuals who are familiar with the company. Fisher admitted this was a catch-all inquiry that he called scuttlebutt. Today, we might call it the business grapevine. If handled properly, Fisher claimed, scuttlebutt could provide the investor with substantial clues to identify outstanding investments. Fisher's scuttlebutt investigation led him to interview as many sources as possible. He talked with customers and vendors. He sought out former employees as well as consultants who had worked for the company. He contacted research scientists in universities, government employees, and trade association executives. He also interviewed competitors. Although executives may sometimes hesitate to disclose too much about their own company, Fisher found that they never lack an opinion about their competitors. Most investors are unwilling to commit the time and energy Fisher felt was necessary for understanding a company. Developing a scuttlebutt network and arranging interviews are time-consuming. Replicating the scuttlebutt process for each company under consideration can be exhausting. Fisher found a simple way to reduce his workload: he reduced the number of companies he owned. He always said he would rather own a few outstanding companies than a large number of average businesses. Generally, his portfolios included fewer than 10 companies, and often 3 to 4 companies represented 75% of his entire equity portfolio. Fisher believed that, to be successful, investors needed to do just a few things well. One was investing only in companies that were within their circle of competence. Fisher himself made that mistake in the beginning. I began investing outside the industries which I believed I thoroughly understood, in completely different spheres of activity, situations where I did not have comparable background knowledge. 8 John Burr Williams graduated from Harvard University in 1923 and went on to Harvard Business School, where he got his first taste of economic forecasting and security analysis. After Harvard, he worked as a security analyst at 2 well-known Wall Street firms. He was there through the heady days of the 1920s and the disastrous crash of 1929 and its aftermath. That experience convinced him that to be a good investor, one also needs to be a good economist. 9 So, in 1932, at the age of 30 and already a good investor, he enrolled in Harvard's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Working from a firm belief that what happened in the economy could affect the value of stocks, he had decided to earn an advanced degree in economics. When it came time to choose a topic for his doctoral dissertation, Williams asked advice from Joseph Schumpeter, the noted Austrian economist best known for his theory of creative destruction, who was then a member of the economics faculty. Schumpeter suggested that Williams look at the intrinsic value of a common stock, saying it would fit Williams's background and experience. Williams later commented that perhaps Schumpeter had a more cynical motive. The topic would keep Williams from running afoul of the rest of the faculty, none of whom would want to challenge my own ideas on investments. Nonetheless, Schumpeter's suggestion was the impetus for Williams's famous doctoral dissertation, which, as the theory of investment value, has influenced financial analysts and investors ever since. Williams finished writing his dissertation in 1937. Even though he had not yet defended it, and to the great indignation of several professors, he submitted the work to Macmillan for publication. Macmillan declined. So did McGraw-Hill. Both decided that the book had too many algebraic symbols. Finally, in 1938, Williams found a publisher in Harvard University Press, but only after he agreed to pay part of the printing cost. 2 years later, Williams took his oral exam and, after some intense arguments over the causes of the Great Depression, passed. The theory of investment value is a genuine classic. For 60 years, it has served as the foundation on which many famous economists, Eugene Fama, Harry Markowitz, and Franco Modigliani, to name a few, have based their own work. Warren Buffett calls it one of the most important investment books ever written. Williams's theory, known today as the dividend discount model, or discounted net cash flow analysis, provides a way to put a value on a stock or a bond. Like many important ideas, it can be reduced to a very simple precept: to know what a security is worth today, estimate all the cash it will earn over its lifetime and then discount that total back to a present value. It is the underlying methodology that Warren Buffett uses to evaluate stocks and companies. Buffett condensed Williams's theory as, the value of a business is determined by the net cash flows expected to occur over the life of the business discounted at an appropriate interest rate. Williams described it this way: a cow for her milk, a hen for her eggs, and a stock, by heck, for her dividends. 11 Williams's model is a two-step process. First, it measures cash flows to determine a company's current and future worth. How to estimate cash flows? One quick measure is dividends paid to shareholders. For companies that do not distribute dividends, Williams believed that in theory all retained earnings should eventually turn into dividends. Once a company reaches its mature stage, it would not need to reinvest its earnings for growth, so the management could start distributing the earnings in the form of dividends. Williams wrote, if earnings not paid out in dividends are all successfully reinvested, then these earnings should produce dividends later; if not, then they are money lost. In short, a stock is worth only what you can get out of it. 12 The second step is to discount those estimated cash flows, to allow for some uncertainty. We can never be exactly sure what a company will do, how its products will sell, or what management will do or not do to improve the business. There is always an element of risk, particularly for stocks, even though Williams's theory applies equally well to bonds. What, then, should we use as a discount rate? Williams himself is not explicit on this point, apparently believing his readers could determine for themselves what would be appropriate. Buffett's measuring stick is very straightforward. He uses either the interest rate for long-term, meaning 10-year, U.S. bonds, or when interest rates are very low, he uses the average cumulative rate of return of the overall stock market. By using what amounts to a risk-free rate, Buffett has modified Williams's original thesis. Because he limits his purchases to those with Ben Graham's margin of safety, Buffett ensures that the risk is covered in the transaction itself, and therefore he believes that using a risk-free rate for discounting is appropriate. Peter Bernstein, in his book Capital Ideas, writes that Graham's system is a set of rules, whereas Williams's dividend discount model is a theory, but both approaches end up recommending the same kinds of stocks for purchase. 13 Warren Buffett has used both, with stellar success. Charles Munger. When Warren Buffett began his investment partnership in Omaha in 1956, he had just over $100,000 in capital to work with. One early task, therefore, was to persuade additional investors to sign on. He was making his usual careful, detailed pitch to neighbors Dr. and Mrs. Edwin Davis, when suddenly Dr. Davis interrupted him and abruptly announced they'd give him $100,000. When Buffett asked why, Davis replied, "Because you remind me of Charlie Munger." 14 Charlie who? Even though both men grew up in Omaha and had many acquaintances in common, they did not actually meet until 1959. By the time, Munger had moved to Southern California, but he returned to Omaha for a visit when his father died. Dr. Davis decided it was time the two young men met and brought them together at a dinner in a local restaurant. It was the beginning of an extraordinary partnership. Munger, the son of a lawyer and grandson of a federal judge, had established a successful law practice in the Los Angeles area, but his interstate in the stock market was already strong. At that first dinner, the two young men found much to talk about, including securities. From then on, they communicated often, with Buffett frequently urging Munger to quit law and to concentrate on investing. For a while, he did both. In 1962, he formed an investment partnership much like Buffett's, while maintaining his law practice. 3 very successful years later, he left the law altogether, although to this day he has an office in the firm that bears his name. Munger's investment partnership in Los Angeles, and Buffett's in Omaha, were similar in approach. Both sought to purchase some discount to underlying value. They also enjoyed similar results, both of them outperforming the Dow Jones Industrial Average by impressive margins. It is not surprising, then, that they bought some of the same stocks. Munger, like Buffett, began buying shares of blue-chip stamps in the late 1960s, and eventually he became chairman of its board. When Berkshire and Blue Chip Stamps merged in 1978, he became Berkshire's vice chairman, a position he still holds. The working relationship between Munger and Buffett was not formalized in an official partnership agreement, but it has evolved over the years into something perhaps even closer, more symbiotic. Even before Munger joined the Berkshire board, the two made many investment decisions together, often conferring daily. Gradually their business affairs became more and more interlinked. Today Munger continues as vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway and also serves as chairman of Wesco Financial, which is 80% owned by Berkshire and holds many of the same investments. In every way, he functions as Buffett's acknowledged co-managing partner and alter ego. To get a sense of how closely the two are aligned, we have only to count the number of times Buffett reports Charlie and I did this, or decided that, or believe this, or looked into that, or think this, almost as if Charlie and I were the name of one person. To their working relationship, Munger brought not only financial acumen but the foundation of business law. He also brought an intellectual perspective that is quite different from Buffett's. Munger is passionately interested in many areas of knowledge: science, history, philosophy, psychology, mathematics, and believes that each of those fields holds important concepts that thoughtful people can, and should, apply to all their endeavors, including investment decisions. He calls them the big ideas, and they are the core of his well-known notion of lattice work of mental models for investors. 15 All these threads together, financial knowledge, background in the law, and appreciation of lessons from other disciplines, produced in Munger a somewhat different investment philosophy from that of Buffett. Whereas Buffett was still searching for opportunities at bargain prices, Munger believed in paying a fair price for quality companies. He can be very persuasive. It's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. 16 Warren Buffett. It was Munger who convinced Buffett that paying 3 times book value for See's Candy was actually a good deal. See Chapter 4 for the full story. That was the beginning of a plate-tectonic shift in Buffett's thinking, and he happily acknowledges that it was Charlie who pushed him in a new direction. Both would quickly add that when you find a quality company that also happens to be available at a discounted price, then you've struck oil, or, in Berkshire's case, the next best thing, Coca-Cola. See Chapter 4. One reason Buffett and Munger fit so well is that both men possess an uncompromising attitude toward common-sense business principles. Like Buffett, who endured poor returns in the insurance industry and for a time refused to write policies, Charlie, in his function as CEO of Wesco, refused to make loans when confronted with an unruly savings and loan industry. Both exhibit managerial qualities necessary to run high-quality businesses. Berkshire Hathaway's shareholders are blessed in having managing partners who look after their interest and help them make money in all economic environments. With Buffett's policy on mandatory retirement, he does not believe in it. Berkshire's shareholders will continue to benefit not from one mine but too long into the future. A blending of influences. Shortly after Graham's death in 1976, Buffett became the designated steward of Graham's value approach to investing. Indeed, Buffett's name became synonymous with value investing. It is easy to see why. He was the most famous of Graham's dedicated students, and Buffett never missed an opportunity to acknowledge the intellectual debt he owed to Graham. Even today, Buffett considers Graham to be the one individual, after his father, who had the most influence on his investment life. 17 How, then, does Buffett reconcile his intellectual indebtedness to Graham with stock purchases like the Washington Post Company, 1973, and the Coca-Cola Company, 1988? Neither passed Graham's strict financial test for purchase, yet Buffett made significant investments in both. As early as 1965, Buffett was becoming aware that Graham's strategy of buying cheap stocks was not ideal. 18 Following his mentor's approach of searching for companies that were selling for less than their net working capital, Buffett bought some genuine losers. Several companies that he had bought at a cheap price, hence they met Graham's test for purchase, were cheap because their underlying businesses were suffering. From his earliest investment mistakes, Buffett began moving away from Graham's strict teachings. "I evolved," he admitted, "but I didn't go from ape to human or human to ape in a nice even manner." 19 He was beginning to appreciate the qualitative nature of certain companies, compared with the quantitative aspects of others. Despite that, however, he still found himself searching for bargains, sometimes with horrible results. "My punishment," he confessed, "was an education in the economics of short-line farm implementation manufacturers, Dempster Mill Manufacturing, Third Place Department Stores, Hochschild Kahn, and New England Textile Manufacturers, Berkshire Hathaway." 20 Buffett's evolution was delayed, he admitted, because what Graham taught him was so valuable. When evaluating stocks, Graham did not think about the specifics of the businesses. Nor did he ponder the capabilities of management. He limited his research investigation to corporate filings and annual reports. If there was a mathematical probability of making money because the share price was less than the assets of the company, Graham purchased the company, regardless of its business or its management. To increase the probability of success, he purchased as many of these statistical equations as possible. If Graham's teachings were limited to these precepts, Buffett would have had little regard for him. But the margin of safety theory that Graham emphasized was so important to Buffett that he could overlook all other current weaknesses of Graham's methodology. Even today, Buffett continues to embrace Graham's primary idea, the theory of margin of safety. 42 years after reading that, Buffett noted, "I still think those are the three right words." 21 The key lesson that Buffett took from Graham was that successful investing involved purchasing stocks when their market price was at a significant discount to the underlying business value. In addition to the margin of safety theory, which became the intellectual framework of Buffett's thinking, Graham helped Buffett appreciate the folly of following stock market fluctuations. Stocks have an investment characteristic and a speculative characteristic, Graham taught, and the speculative characteristics are a consequence of people's fear and greed. These emotions, present in most investors, cause stock prices to gyrate far above and, more important, far below a company's intrinsic value, thus presenting a margin of safety. Graham taught Buffett that if he could insulate himself from the emotional whirlwinds of the stock market, he had an opportunity to exploit the irrational behavior of other investors, who purchased stocks based on emotion, not logic. From Graham, Buffett learned how to think independently. If he reached a logical conclusion based on sound judgment, Graham counseled Buffett, he should not be dissuaded just because others disagree. "You are neither right or wrong because the crowd disagrees with you," he wrote. "You are right because your data and reasoning are right." 22 Phil Fisher in many ways was the exact opposite of Ben Graham. Fisher believed that to make sound decisions, investors needed to become fully informed about a business. That meant they needed to investigate all aspects of the company. They needed to look beyond the numbers and learn about the business itself because that information mattered a great deal. They also needed to study the attributes of the company's management, for management's abilities could affect the value of the underlying business. They should learn as much as they could about the industry in which the company operated, and about its competitors. Every source of information should be exploited. Appearing on the PBS show Money World in 1993, Buffett was asked what investment advice he would give a money manager just starting out. "I'd tell him to do exactly what I did 40-odd years ago, which is to learn about every company in the United States that has publicly traded securities." Moderator Adam Smith protested, "But there's 27,000 public companies." "Well," said Buffett, "start with the A's." 23. From Fisher, Buffett learned the value of scuttlebutt. Throughout the years, Buffett has developed an extensive network of contacts who assist him in evaluating businesses. Finally, Fisher taught Buffett the benefits of focusing on just a few investments. He believed that it was a mistake to teach investors that putting their eggs in several baskets reduces risk. The danger in purchasing too many stocks, he felt, is that it becomes impossible to watch all the eggs in all the baskets. In his view, buying shares in a company without taking the time to develop a thorough understanding of the business was far more risky than having limited diversification. John Burr Williams provided Buffett with a methodology for calculating the intrinsic value of a business, which is a cornerstone of his investing approach. The differences between Graham and Fisher are apparent. Graham, the quantitative analyst, emphasized only those factors that could be measured: fixed assets, current earnings, and dividends. His investigative research was limited to corporate filings and annual reports. He spent no time interviewing customers, competitors, or managers. Fisher's approach was the antithesis of Graham. Fisher, the qualitative analyst, emphasized those factors that he believed increased the value of a company, principally future prospects and management capability. Whereas Graham was interested in purchasing only cheap stocks, Fisher was interested in purchasing companies that had the potential to increase their intrinsic value over the long term. He would go to great lengths, including conducting extensive interviews, to uncover bits of information that might improve his selection process. Although Graham's and Fisher's investment approach differ, notes Buffett, they parallel in the investment world. 24. Taking the liberty of rephrasing, I would say that instead of paralleling, in Warren Buffett they dovetail. His investment approach combines qualitative understanding of the business and its management, as taught by Fisher, and a quantitative understanding of price and value, as taught by Graham. Warren Buffett once said, "I'm 15% Fisher and 85% Benjamin Graham." 25. That remark has been widely quoted, but it is important to remember that it was made in 1969. In the intervening years, Buffett has made a gradual but definite shift toward Fisher's philosophy of buying a select few good businesses and owning those businesses for several years. My hunch is that if he were to make a similar statement today, the balance would come pretty close to 50-50. Without question, it was Charlie Munger who was most responsible for moving Buffett toward Fisher's thinking. In a real sense, Munger is the active embodiment of Fisher's qualitative theories. From the start, Charlie had a keen appreciation of the value of a better business, and the wisdom of paying a reasonable price for it. Through their years together, Charlie has continued to preach the wisdom of paying up for a good business. In one important respect, however, Munger is also the present-day echo of Ben Graham. Years earlier, Graham had taught Buffett the twofold significance of emotion in investing, the mistakes it triggers for those who base irrational decisions on it, and the opportunities it thus creates for those who can avoid falling into the same traps. Munger, through his readings in psychology, has continued to develop that theme. He calls it the psychology of misjudgment, a notion we look at more fully in Chapter 11, and through persistent emphasis, he keeps it an integral part of Berkshire's decision-making. It is one of his most important contributions. Buffett's dedication to Ben Graham, Phil Fisher, John Burr Williams, and Charlie Munger is understandable. Graham gave Buffett the intellectual basis for investing, the margin of safety, and helped Buffett learn how to master his emotions to take advantage of market fluctuations. Fisher gave Buffett an updated, workable methodology that enabled him to identify good long-term investments and manage a portfolio over the long term, and taught the value of focusing on just a few good companies. Williams gave him a mathematical model for calculating true value. Munger helped Buffett appreciate the economic returns that come from buying and owning great businesses. The frequent confusion surrounding Buffett's investment actions is easily understood when we acknowledge that Buffett is the synthesis of all four men. It is not enough to have good intelligence, Descartes wrote, the principal thing is to apply it well. It is the application that separates Buffett from other investment managers. Many of his peers are highly intelligent, disciplined, and dedicated. Buffett stands above them all because of his formidable ability to integrate the strategies of the four wise men into a single cohesive approach. 3. Our main business is insurance. The early days of Berkshire Hathaway. When the Buffett partnership took control of Berkshire Hathaway in 1965, stockholders' equity had dropped by half and loss from operations exceeded $10 million. Buffett and Ken Chase, who managed the textile group, labored intensely to turn the textile mills around. Results were disappointing, returns on equity struggled to reach double digits. Amid the gloom, there was one bright spot, a sign of things to come: Buffett's deft handling of the company's common stock portfolio. When Buffett took over, the corporation had $2.9 million in marketable securities. By the end of the first year, Buffett had enlarged the securities account to $5.4 million. In 1967, the dollar return from investing was 3 times the return of the entire textile division, which had 10 times the equity base. Nonetheless, over the next decade Buffett had to come to grips with certain realities. First, the very nature of the textile business made high returns on equity improbable. Textiles are commodities, and commodities by definition have a difficult time differentiating their products from those of competitors. Foreign competition, which employed a cheaper labor force, was squeezing profit margins. Second, to stay competitive, the textile mills would require significant capital improvements, a prospect that is frightening in an inflationary environment and disastrous if the business returns are anemic. Buffett made no attempt to hide the difficulties, but on several occasions he explained his thinking. The textile mills were the largest employer in the area. The workforce was an older age group with relatively non-transferable skills. Management had shown a high degree of enthusiasm, the unions were being reasonable, and lastly, he believed that the textile business could attain some profits. However, Buffett made it clear that he expected the textile group to earn positive returns on modest capital expenditures. "I won't close down a business of subnormal profitability merely to add a fraction of a point to our corporate returns," said Buffett. "I also feel it inappropriate for even an exceptionally profitable company to fund an operation once it appears to have unending losses in prospect. Adam Smith would disagree with my first proposition and Karl Marx would disagree with my second. The middle ground," he explained, "is the only position that leaves me comfortable. One in 1980, the annual report revealed ominous clues for the future of the textile group. That year, the group lost its prestigious lead-off position in the chairman's letter. By the next year, textiles were not discussed in the letter at all. Then, the inevitable. In July 1985, Buffett closed the books on the textile group, thus ending a business that had started some 100 years earlier. The experience was not a complete failure. First, Buffett learned a valuable lesson about corporate turnarounds: they seldom succeed. Second, the textile group generated enough capital in the earlier years to buy an insurance company, and that is a much brighter story. The insurance business in March 1967, Berkshire Hathaway purchased, for $8.6 million, the outstanding stock of two insurance companies headquartered in Omaha, National Indemnity Company and National Fire and Marine Insurance Company. It was the beginning of a phenomenal success story. Berkshire Hathaway, the textile company, would not long survive, but Berkshire Hathaway, the investment company that encompassed it, was about to take off. To appreciate the phenomenon, we must recognize the true value of owning an insurance company. Sometimes insurance companies are good investments, sometimes not. They are, however, always terrific investment vehicles. Policyholders, by paying their premiums, provide a constant stream of cash, known as the float. Insurance companies set aside some of this cash, called the reserve, to pay claims each year, based on their best estimates, and invest the rest. To give themselves a high degree of liquidity, since it is seldom possible to know exactly when claim payments will need to be paid, most opt to invest in marketable securities, primarily stocks and bonds. Thus Warren Buffett had acquired not only two modestly healthy companies, but a cast-iron vehicle for managing investments. For a seasoned stock picker like Buffett, it was a perfect match. In just 2 years, he increased the combined stocks and bonds portfolio of the two companies from $31.9 million to nearly $42 million. At the same time, the insurance businesses themselves were doing quite well. In just 1 year, the net income of National Indemnity rose from $1.6 million to $2.2 million. Buffett's early success in insurance led him to expand aggressively into this group. Over the next decade, he purchased 3 additional insurance companies and organized 5 more. And he has not slowed down. As of 2004, Berkshire owns 38 insurance companies, including 2 giants: the Government Employees Insurance Company, Geico, and General Re, each of which has several subsidiaries. Government Employees Insurance Company. Warren Buffett first became acquainted with Geico while a student at Columbia because his mentor, Ben Graham, was a chairman of its board of directors. A favorite part of the Buffett lore is the now familiar story of the young student visiting the company's offices on a Saturday morning and pounding on the door until a janitor let him in. Buffett then spent 5 hours getting an education in the insurance business from the only person working that day, Lorimer Davidson, an investment officer who eventually became the company's CEO. What he learned intrigued him. Geico had been founded on a couple of simple but fairly revolutionary concepts. If you insure only people with good driving records, you'll have fewer claims, and if you sell direct to customers, without agents, you keep overhead costs down. Back home in Omaha and working for his father's brokerage firm, a very young Warren Buffett wrote a report of Geico for a financial journal in which he noted, in what may be the understatement of that decade, there is reason to believe the major portion of growth lies ahead. Buffett put $10,282 in the company, then sold it the next year at 50% profit. But he always kept track of the company. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Geico prospered. But then it began to stumble. For several years, the company had tried to expand its customer base by underpricing and relaxing its eligibility requirements, and 2 years in a row it seriously miscalculated the amount needed for reserves, out of which claims are paid. The combined effect of these mistakes was that, by the mid-1970s, the once bright company was near bankruptcy. When the stock price dropped from $61 to $2 a share in 1976, Warren Buffett started buying. Over a period of 5 years, with an unshakable belief that it was a strong company with its basic competitive advantages unchanged, he invested $45.7 million in Geico. The very next year, 1977, the company was profitable again. Over the next 2 decades, Geico had positive underwriting ratios, meaning that it took in more in premiums than it paid out in claims, in every year but one. In the industry, where negative ratios are the rule rather than the exception, that kind of record is almost unheard of. And that excess float gives Geico tremendous resources for investments, brilliantly managed by a remarkable man named Lou Simpson. By 1991, Berkshire owned nearly half, 48%, of Geico. The insurance company's impressive performance, and Buffett's interest in the company, continued to climb. In 1994, serious discussions began about Berkshire's buying the entire company, and a year later the final deal was announced. At that point, Berkshire owned 51% of Geico, and agreed to purchase the rest for $2.3 billion. This at a time when most of the insurance industry struggled with profitability and most investors stayed away in droves. By the time all the paperwork was done, it was early 1996. At that point, Geico officially became a wholly owned unit of Berkshire Hathaway, managed independently from Berkshire's other insurance holdings. Despite a rough spot or two, Buffett's trust in the basic concept of Geico has been handsomely rewarded. From 1996 to 2003, the company increased its share of market from 2.7% to 5%. The biggest rough spot was the year 2000, when many policyholders switched to other insurers, and a very large, very expensive advertising campaign, $260 million, failed to produce as much new business as projected. Things began to stabilize in 2001, and by 2002, Geico was solidly back on track, with substantial growth in market share and in profits. That year, Geico took in $6.9 billion in premiums, a huge jump from the $2.9 billion booked in 1996, the year Berkshire took full ownership. In April 2003, the company hit a major milestone when it added its 5 millionth policyholder. By year-end 2003, those 5 million policyholders had sent in premiums totaling $8.1 billion. Because its profit margins increase the longer policyholders stay with the company, Geico focuses on building long-term relationships with customers. When Buffett took over the company in 1996, he put in a new incentive system that rewards this focus. Half the bonuses and profit sharing are based on policies that are at least 1 year old, the other half on policyholder growth. The average Geico customer has more than one vehicle insured, pays premiums of approximately $1,100 year after year, but maintains an excellent driving record. As Buffett once pointed out, the economics of that formula are simple: cash is pouring in rather than going out. From the early bargain days of $2 a share in 1976, Buffett paid close to $70 a share for the rest of the company in 1996. He makes no apologies. He considers Geico a unique company, with unlimited potential, something worth paying a hefty price for. In this perspective, if you want the very best companies, you have to be willing to pay up when they become available. Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger, has been a profound influence. Knowing their close working relationship, it's a fair bet that Munger had a lot to say about Berkshire's other big insurance decision. General Re Corporation. In 1996, Buffett paid $2.3 billion to buy the half of Geico he didn't already own. 2 years later, he paid 7 times that amount, about $16 billion in Berkshire Hathaway stock, to acquire a reinsurance company called General Re. It was his biggest acquisition by far. Some have called it the single biggest event in Berkshire history. 5 Reinsurance is a sector of the insurance industry not well known to the general public, for it doesn't deal in the familiar products of life, homeowners, or auto insurance. In simplest terms, reinsurers insure other insurance companies. Through a contract that spells out how the premiums and the losses are to be apportioned, a reinsurer takes on some percentage of the original company's risk. This allows the primary insurer to assume a higher level of risk, reduces its needs for operating capital, and moderates loss ratios. For its part, the reinsurer receives a share of premiums earned, to invest as it sees fit. At General Re, that investment had been primarily in bonds. This, in fact, was a key part of Buffett's strategy in buying the company. When Buffett acquired it, General Re owned approximately $19 billion in bonds, $5 billion in stocks, and $15 billion in float. By using Berkshire stock to buy the company and its heavy bond portfolio, Buffett in one neat step shifted the balance of Berkshire's overall holdings from 80% stocks to 60%. When the IRS ruled late in 1998 that the merger involved no capital gains, that meant he had managed to sell almost 20% of Berkshire's equity holdings, thus deftly sidestepping the worst of price volatility, essentially tax-free. The only significant staff change that followed the merger was the elimination of General Re's investment unit. Some 150 people had been in charge of deciding where to invest the company's funds. They were replaced with just one individual, Warren Buffett. Just after Berkshire bought General Re, the company had one of its worst years. In 1999, Gen Re, as it is known, paid claims resulting from natural disasters, a major hailstorm in Australia, earthquakes in Turkey, and a devastating series of storms in Europe, from the largest house fire in history, and from high-profile movie flops. The company had insured box office receipts. To make matters worse, Gen Re was part of a grouping of several insurers and reinsurers that became ensnarled in a workers' compensation tangle that ended in multiple litigation and a loss exposure of approximately $275 million for 2 years running, 1998 and 1999. The problem, it later became apparent, was that Gen Re was underpricing its product. Premiums coming in, remember, will ultimately be paid to policyholders who have claims. When more is paid out than comes in, the result is an underwriting loss. The ratio of that loss to the premiums received in any given year is known as the cost of float for that year. When the two parts of the formula are even, the cost of float is zero, which is a good thing. Even better is less than zero, or negative float cost, which is what happens when premiums outstrip loss payments, producing an underwriting profit. This is referred to as negative cost of float, but it is actually a positive. The insurer is literally being paid to hold the capital. Float is a wonderful thing, Buffett has often commented, unless it comes at too high a cost. Premiums that are too low or losses that are unexpectedly high adversely affect the cost of float. When both occur simultaneously, the cost of float skyrockets. And that is just what happened with Gen Re, although it wasn't completely obvious at first. Buffett had realized as early as 1999 that the policies were underpriced, and he began working to correct it. The effects of such changes are not felt overnight, however, and in 2000, General Re experienced an underwriting loss of $1.6 billion, producing a float cost of 6%. Still, Buffett felt able to report in his 2000 letter to shareholders that the situation was improving and he expected the upward trend to continue. Then, in a moment of terrible, unintentional foreshadowing, he added, "Absent a mega catastrophe, we expect our float cost to fall in 2001. Some 6 months later, on September 11, the nation had an enormous hole torn in its soul by a mega catastrophe we had never imagined possible. In a letter to shareholders that was sent out with the third quarter 2001 report, Buffett wrote, "A mega catastrophe is no surprise. One will occur from time to time, and this will not be our last. We did not, however, price for man-made mega cats, and we were foolish in not doing so. Buffett estimated that Berkshire's underwriting losses from the terrorist attacks on September 11 totaled $2.275 billion, of which $1.70 billion fell to General Re. That level of loss galvanized a change at Gen Re. More aggressive steps were taken to make sure the policies were priced correctly, and that sufficient reserves were in place to pay claims. These corrective maneuvers were successful. In 2002, after 5 years of losses, Gen Re reported its first underwriting profit, prompting Buffett to announce at the 2002 annual meeting, "We're back." Warren Buffett, as is well known, takes the long view. He is the first to admit, with his trademark candor, that he had not seen the problems at Gen Re. That in itself is interesting, and oddly ironic, to Buffett's observers. That such an experienced hand as Buffett could miss the problems demonstrates the complexity of the insurance industry. Had those problems been apparent, I have no doubt Buffett would not have paid the price he did for Gen Re. I'm also reasonably certain he would have proceeded, however, because his line of sight goes to the long term. The reinsurance industry offers huge potential, and a well-run reinsurance business can create enormous value for shareholders. Buffett knows that better than most. So, even though Gen Re's pricing errors created problems in the short run, and even though he bought those problems along with the company, this does not negate his basic conclusion that a well-managed reinsurance company could create great value for Berkshire. In a situation such as this, Buffett's instinct is to fix the problems, not unload the company. As he usually does, Buffett credits the company's managers with restoring underwriting discipline by setting rational prices for the policies and setting up sufficient reserves. Under their leadership, he wrote in the 2003 letter to shareholders, General Re will be a powerful engine driving Berkshire's future profitability. 8. At this writing, General Re is one of only 2 major global reinsurers with a AAA rating. The other is also a Berkshire company, the National Indemnity Reinsurance Operation. Berkshire Hathaway Reinsurance Group. The National Indemnity Insurance Operation inside Berkshire today is a far cry from the company that Buffett purchased in 1967. Different, that is, in operation and scope, but not in underlying philosophy. One aspect of National Indemnity that did not exist under its founder, Jack Ringwald, is the reinsurance division. Today, this division, run from National Indemnity's office in Stamford, Connecticut, contributes powerfully to Berkshire's revenues. The reinsurance group is headed by Ajit Jain, born in India and educated at the Indian Institute of Technology and at Harvard. He recently joked that when he joined Berkshire in 1982, he didn't even know how to spell reinsurance. Yet Jain has built a tremendously professor-able operation that earns Buffett's highest praise year in and year out. 9. Working on the foundation of Berkshire's financial strength, the reinsurance group is able to write policies that other companies, even other reinsurers, would shy away from. Some of them stand out because they are so unusual. A policy insuring against injury to superstar shortstop Alex Rodriguez for the Texas Rangers baseball team, or against a $1 billion payout by an internet lottery. Commenting on the latter, a vice president in the reinsurance division noted, as long as the premium is higher than the odds, we're comfortable. 10. The bulk of underwriting at the reinsurance group is not quite so flashy. It is, however, extremely profitable. Significant revenue increases occurred in 2002 and 2003. In the aftermath of September 11, many companies and individuals increased their insurance coverage, often significantly, yet there were no catastrophic losses in the 2 following years. In 2003, the Berkshire Hathaway Reinsurance Group brought in $4.43 billion in premiums, bringing its total float to just under $14 billion. Perhaps more significant, its cost of float that year was a negative 3%, meaning there was no cost, but rather a profit. In this case, remember, negative is a positive, that is because the reinsurance group in 2003 had an underwriting gain, more premiums than payouts, of more than $1 billion. For comparison, That same year the Geico underwriting gain was $452 million, and General Re's was $145 million. It is no wonder Buffett says of Gine, "If you see Ajit at our annual meeting, bow deeply." 11. Warren Buffett understands the insurance business in a way that few others do. His success derives in large part from acknowledging the essential commodity nature of the industry and elevating his insurance companies to the level of a franchise. Insurance companies sell a product that is indistinguishable from those of competitors. Policies are standardized and can be copied by anyone. There are no trademarks, no patents, no advantages in location or raw materials. It is easy to get licensed and insurance rates are an open book. Insurance, in other words, is a commodity product. In a commodity business, a common way to gain market share is to cut prices. In periods of intense competition, other companies were willing to sell insurance policies below the cost of doing business rather than risk losing market share. Buffett held firm. Berkshire's insurance operations would not move into unprofitable territory. Only once, at General Re, did this happen, and it caught Buffett unaware. You can always write dumb insurance policies. There is an unlimited market for dumb insurance policies. And they're very troubling because the first day the premium comes in, that's the last time you see any new money. From then on, it's all going out. And that's not our aim in life. 12. Warren Buffett, 2001. Unwilling to compete on price, Buffett instead seeks to distinguish Berkshire's insurance companies in two other ways. First, by financial strength. Today, in annual revenue and profit, Berkshire's insurance group ranks second, only to AIG, in the property casualty industry. Additionally, the ratio of Berkshire's investment portfolio, $35.2 billion, to its premium volume, $8.1 billion, is significantly higher than the industry average. The second method of differentiation involves Buffett's underwriting philosophy. His goal is simple: to always write large volumes of insurance but only at prices that make sense. If prices are low, he is content to do very little business. This philosophy was instilled at National Indemnity by its founder, Jack Ringwalt. Since that time, says Buffett, Berkshire has never knowingly wavered from this underwriting discipline. The only exception is General Re, and its underpricing had a large impact on Berkshire's overall performance for several years. Today, that unpleasant state of affairs has been rectified. Berkshire's superior financial strength has distinguished its insurance operations from the rest of the industry. When competitors vanish from the marketplace because they are frightened by recent losses, Berkshire stands by as a constant supplier of insurance. In a word, the financial integrity that Buffett has imposed on Berkshire's insurance companies has created a franchise in what is otherwise a commodity business. It's not surprising that Buffett notes, in his typical straightforward way, our main business is insurance. 13. The stream of cash generated by Berkshire's insurance operations is mind-boggling, some $44.2 billion in 2003. What Buffett does with that cash defines him and his company. And that takes us to our next chapter. 4. Buying a business. Berkshire Hathaway, Incorporated, is complex but not complicated. It owns, at the moment, just shy of 100 separate businesses, the insurance companies described in the previous chapter, and a wide variety of non-insurance businesses acquired through the income stream from the insurance operation. Using that same cash stream, it also purchases bonds and stocks of publicly traded companies. Running through it all is Warren Buffett's down-to-earth way of looking at a business, whether it's one he's considering buying in its entirety or one he's evaluating for stock purchase. There is no fundamental difference, Buffett believes, between the two. Both make him an owner of the business, and therefore both decisions should, in his view, spring from this owner's point of view. This is the single most important thing to understand about Buffett's investment approach. Buying stocks means buying a business and requires the same discipline. In fact, It has always been Buffett's preference to directly own a company, for it permits him to influence what he considers the most critical issue in a business: capital allocation. But when stocks represent a better value, his choice is to own a portion of a company by purchasing its common stock. In either case, Buffett follows the same strategy. He looks for companies he understands, with consistent earnings history and favorable long-term prospects, showing good return on equity with little debt, that are operated by honest and competent people, and, importantly, are available at attractive prices. This owner-oriented way of looking at potential investments is bedrock to Buffett's approach. All we want is to be in businesses that we understand, run by people whom we like, and priced attractively relative to their future prospects. Warren Buffett, 1994, because he operates from this owner's perspective, wherein buying stock is the same as buying companies, it is also true that buying companies is the same as buying stock. The same principles apply in both cases, and therefore both hold important lessons for us. Those principles are described in some detail in chapters 5 through 8. Collectively, they make up what I have called the Warren Buffett way, and they are applied, almost subconsciously, every time he considers buying shares of a company, or acquiring the entire company. In this chapter, we take a brief background tour of some of these purchases, so that we may better understand the lessons they offer. A mosaic of many businesses. Berkshire Hathaway, Incorporated, as it exists today, is best understood as a holding company. In addition to the insurance companies, it also owns a newspaper, a candy company, an ice cream, hamburger chain, an encyclopedia publisher, several furniture stores, a maker of Western boots, jewelry stores, a supplier of custom picture framing material, a paint company, a company that manufactures and distributes uniforms, a vacuum cleaner business, a public utility, a couple of shoe companies, and a household name in underwear, among others. Some of these companies, particularly the more recent acquisitions, are jewels that Buffett found in a typically Buffett-like way. He advertised for them in the Berkshire Hathaway annual reports. His criteria are straightforward: a simple, understandable business with consistent earning power, good return on equity, little debt, and good management in place. He is interested in companies in the $5 billion to $20 billion range, the larger the better. He is not interested in turnarounds, hostile takeovers, or tentative situations where no asking price has been determined. He promises complete confidentiality and a quick response. In Berkshire Hathaway's annual reports and in remarks to shareholders, he has often described his acquisition strategy this way: it's very scientific. Charlie and I just sit around and wait for the phone to ring. Sometimes it's a wrong number. The strategy works. Through this public announcement, and also through referrals from managers of current Berkshire companies, Buffett has acquired an amazing string of successful businesses. Some of them have been Berkshire companies for decades, and their stories have become part of the Buffett lore. See's Candy Shops, for example, has been a Berkshire subsidiary since 1972. It is noteworthy because it represents the first time Buffett moved away from Ben Graham's dictum to buy only undervalued companies. The net purchase price, $30 million, was 3 times book value. Without doubt, it was a good decision. In 2003 alone, See's pre-tax earnings were $59 million, almost exactly twice the original purchase price. At Berkshire's annual meeting in 1997, 25 years after the See's purchase, Charlie Munger recalled, "It was the first time we paid for quality." To which Buffett added, "If we hadn't bought See's, we wouldn't have bought Coke." Later on in this chapter, the full significance of that comment becomes apparent. Another company well known to Berkshire followers is Nebraska Furniture Mart. This enormous retail operation began in Omaha, Buffett's hometown, in 1937 when a Russian immigrant named Rose Blumkin, who had been selling furniture from her basement, put up $500 to open a small store. In 1983, Buffett paid Mrs. B. as she was universally known, $55 million for 80% of her store. Today the Nebraska Furniture Mart, which comprises 3 retail units totaling 1.2 million square feet on one large piece of real estate, sells more home furnishings than any other store in the country. Running a close second is the Second Mart, opened in 2002 in Kansas City. In his 2003 letter to shareholders, Buffett linked the success of this 450,000 square foot operation to the legendary Mrs. B, who was still at work until the year she died at the age of 104. One piece of wisdom she imparted, Buffett wrote, was if you have the lowest price, customers will find you at the bottom of a river. Our store serving Greater Kansas City, which is located in one of the area's more sparsely populated parts, has proved Mrs. B's point. Though we have more than 25 acres of parking, the lot has at times overflowed. For in January 1986, Buffett paid $315 million in cash for the Scott and Fetzer Company, a conglomerate of 21 separate companies, including the makers of Kirby vacuum cleaners and World Book Encyclopedia. It was one of Berkshire's largest business acquisitions up to that point, and has since exceeded Buffett's own optimistic expectations. It is a model of an organization that creates a large return on equity with very little debt, and that is one of Buffett's favorite traits. In fact, he calculates that Scott Fetzer's return on equity would easily place it among the top 1% of the Fortune 500. Scott Fetzer's various companies make a range of rather specialized, some would say boring, industrial products, but what they really make is money for Berkshire Hathaway. Since Buffett bought it, Scott Fetzer has distributed over 100% of its earnings back to Berkshire while simultaneously increasing its own earnings. In recent years, Warren Buffett has turned more and more of his attention to buying companies instead of shares. The story of how Buffett came to acquire these diverse businesses is interesting in itself. Perhaps more to the point, the stories collectively give us valuable insight into Buffett's way of looking at companies. In this chapter, we have space for an abbreviated visit to just 3 of these acquisitions, but that is by no means all. To illustrate the wide range of industries within Berkshire, here are a few examples of recent acquisitions. Fruit of the Loom, which produces 1/3 of the men's and boys' underwear sold in the United States. Purchased in 2002 for $835 million, which, after accounting for the earned interest on assumed debt, was a net of $730 million. Guerin, which makes children's clothing, including the popular Guerinimals line. Purchased in 2002 for $270 million. Metech, which produces structural hardware for the building industry. Purchased in 2001 for $400 million. An interesting aspect of this deal is that Berkshire now owns only 90% of the company. The other 10% is owned by 55 managers who love their company and wanted to be part owners. This entrepreneurial spirit among management is one of the qualities Buffett looks for. Larson Jull, the leading supplier of framing materials to custom framing shops. Purchased in 2001 for $225 million. Court Business Services, which leases quality furniture to offices and corporate-owned apartments. Purchased in 2000 for $467 million, including $83 million of debt. Benbridge Jeweler, a West Coast chain owned and operated by the same family for 4 generations. A requirement of the purchase was that the Bridge family remain to manage the company. Purchased in 2000 for a price not disclosed publicly. Justin Industries, which makes Western boots, Justin, Tony Lama, and other brands, and, under the Acme brand name, Bricks. Purchased in 2000 for $600 million. Benjamin Moore, which has been making paint for 121 years. Purchased in 2000 for $1 billion. Shaw Industries, the largest manufacturer of carpeting in the world. Purchased 87% of the company in 2000 and the remainder in early 2002, for a total of $2 billion. Currently, Shaw is, Except for insurance, Berkshire's largest business, with 2003 earnings of $436 million. Clayton Homes. In 1966, James Clayton, the son of a Tennessee sharecropper, started a mobile home business with $25,000 of borrowed money. Within 4 years, Clayton Homes was selling 700 units annually. Clayton is now one of the largest makers of manufactured homes in the United States, with about $1.2 billion in sales in 2003. Home models range from modest, 500 square feet, priced at $10,000, to luxury, $100,000 for 1,500 square feet, with hardwood floors, stainless steel appliances, and island kitchens. Clayton has about 976 retailers in the United States, including 302 company-owned stores, 86 company-owned community sales offices, and 588 manufactured housing communities in 33 states. It also owns and operates financing, loan servicing, and insurance subsidiaries. The company went public in 1983, and Berkshire Hathaway acquired it in August 2003 for $1.7 billion. James Clayton gained his experience and education the hard way. Determined to pull himself out of the backbreaking work his parents endured, his father picked cotton and his mother worked in a shirt factory, Clayton financed his education at the University of Tennessee by playing guitar on the radio. He eventually became a part-time host on StarTime, a weekly variety program on Knoxville TV, and sang along with people like Dolly Parton. Then, while in college, he started a used car business with his fraternity brothers, but the business went bankrupt in 1961 when the bank called his loan. My parents thought for sure that we were going to jail, and I made a pact with myself that I haven't violated. I was never going to be vulnerable to a bank again. 5. The acquisition of Clayton Homes.